Hello and welcome everyone to our today's wrap-up series. And today we will start with a demonstration of Russian unwavering will to make peace by shelling Kyiv, for example, with ballistic missiles. Of course, that's irony. And also we will try to uncover that Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, is not entire his country. We will reveal some acts of kindness and just human forms of expression from Hungarian society and activists that helped Ukraine a lot. So let's dive in. A brutal reminder of how Russia wages peace talks together with war, that it struck the capital of Kyiv with several ballistic missiles this night, with dozens of buildings, civilian infrastructure objects targeted, and up to 10 civilians being killed after the strikes. On April 24th, when Russian forces launched a massive missile and drone assault on Kyiv, the city was jolted around 1 a.m. in the night, local time, by a wave of explosions, followed by another series of strikes around 4 a.m. According to Ukrainian authorities, at least 9 people were killed and over 70 are now injured, including 6 children and even a pregnant woman. Emergency services continue search and rescue operations, with people being uncovered alive under the rubble of their own homes, and with dozens hospitalized and some children still unaccounted for. Fires broke out across districts, and Shevchenkivsky, Holosiyevsky, and Podilsky, for example, and the city of Kyiv, damaging residential buildings, vehicles, and commercial enterprises. And Kyiv Major Vitaly Klitschko and the military administration confirmed widespread destruction and described the assault as a blatant attack on civilians yet again. It is one of the most indiscriminate attacks on civilian infrastructure in the city of Kyiv since the start of the full-scale invasion in 2022. Our correspondent Nikita Skoblikov was there to film the results of this horrible strike and some witnesses.
I heard the air raid alert but did not react. After 15 minutes, there was a very strong explosion, and I ran with my dog into the corridor to be between 2 walls. I wanted to get another stool, so I ran to the kitchen. Then glass started falling from all the windows. There was a second explosion. It was very scary. Then there was a third explosion. Dust everywhere, people were scared.
This was no isolated strike, as you know. In what officials described as a massive combined strike, Russian missiles also hit regions including Zhytomyr, Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkiv, Poltava, Khmelnytsky, Sumy, and Zaporizhia. Kyiv, however, was the hardest hit. The scale of devastation prompted Poland to get their fighter jets up in the sky to guard against the possibility of missiles going into their airspace. Already a routine practice for Poland and the Allies, but no Russian missiles have been shot down by the aviation of the partners yet. Despite Russia's rhetoric of ceasefire and desire for peace, such attacks have become part of a pattern, which seems to be completely ignored by the peacemakers and those who call themselves so. The side that actually wants peace does not target civilian of their rival opponent. Moscow continues to target residential neighborhoods, public infrastructure, and power grids. Actions widely condemned by the international community as war crimes and indiscriminate acts against civilians, which are prohibited by international law. But let's be honest, international law stands silent when such players as Russian Federation act with their power and silence its very international law. And we can see that for more than a decade here in Eastern Europe, with many countries suffering from that. All this comes as the United States continues its efforts to negotiate some kind of peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine has already agreed to a proposed 30-day unconditional ceasefire, but Moscow has not agreed to that and continues the strikes and the offensive. As you can see, they are also gathering forces near Sumy, near Kharkiv, near Kherson, and to try to push to the boundaries of the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast up to the May 9th, their sacred day of the victory over Nazism, the day that is widely used in Russian propaganda to cultivate this strive for war. Well, the Kremlin insists on impossible terms, among them formal recognition of its control over Crimea and acceptance of its occupation in the east of Ukraine, as well as leaving entire 4 regions of Ukraine, including Kherson and Zaporizhia. Let us recall the 2018 statement by then Secretary of State of the United States, Mike Pompeo.
As we did in the Wells Declaration in 1940, the United States reaffirms as policy its refusal to recognize the Kremlin's claims of sovereignty over territory seized by force in contravention of international law. In concert with allies, partners, and the international community, the United States rejects Russia's attempted annexation of Crimea and pledges to maintain this policy until Ukraine's territorial integrity is restored. From the press statement by Michael R. Pompeo, United States Secretary of State, dated July 25, 2018.
As I asked the same question to ex-ambassador of the United States to Ukraine, John Herbst, he answered that the Wells Declaration allowed the Western world to quickly recognize independence of the Baltic states during the USSR collapse and thus avoid international pretext for a war between the remnant of the USSR and, for example, NATO. Such position on the illegal annexation of Crimea was a similar decision to allow quick reunification with the continental Ukraine for the peninsula, when the conditions would be possible. As this so-called peace plan is floated, experts warn, if the US legitimizes these international territorial grabs, the biggest losers won't be just Ukraine, it will undermine the global stability and Washington's credibility for years and years to come. Just imagine what chaos could reign over the world if suddenly passive aggressors became active ones and tried to grab more land from their neighbors. Hungary is often described as the European Union's most pro-Russian member. Prime Minister Viktor Orban has famously courted ties with the Kremlin, blocked EU military aid for Ukraine, and opposed Kyiv's path to join the European Union. But for the tens of thousands of Ukrainians who fled to Hungary during the war, the reality they've encountered is far more nuanced than that. While official Hungarian rhetoric remains staunchly anti-Ukrainian, many Ukrainian refugees have found ordinary Hungarians to be surprisingly supportive, welcoming, and even remorseful. Some have a sort of internal guilt about the way their country is acting, one of the activists has said. And they are not alone. Thousands of Hungarians welcomed Ukrainian refugees at train stations in 2022. Volunteer networks continue to help with housing, employment, and school teaching. Budapest itself, the capital of the country, has lit up monuments in Ukrainian colors, offered free public transport to Ukrainians, and opened a Ukrainian language school as a municipal initiative. Even in the face of state propaganda, which brands EU's Ukraine bid as a threat to Hungary economic and sovereignty, public sentiment tells a different story. 2 separate polls in April found that a majority of Hungarians, more than 58%, if we believe that, support Ukraine's EU accession. On April 14th, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban publicly participated in the national consultation on Ukraine's EU bid, some form of referendum, casting his ballot against Ukraine's accession. His message was direct and defiant. "We won't let them decide our future over our heads," he wrote on Facebook, claiming that Ukraine's accession would destroy the Hungarian economy. But critics say this move is more about domestic politics than EU policy. Orban has long used Ukraine as the political scapegoat, warning that supporting Kyiv could lead to Hungary being dragged into war or saddled with unwanted economic pressure. In fact, during the 2022 elections, his party leveraged fake news narratives about Ukraine and the opposition, wanting to send Hungarian troops allegedly to fight in Ukraine, and helping to secure Orban's re-election there. Despite the rhetoric, Hungary remains legally bound to its NATO and EU obligations, continues to receive European funds, And while Budapest officially resists Ukraine's progress towards the EU, behind the scenes, quiet solidarity continues to grow. It isn't just public opinion and humanitarian aid. Hungarians are also supporting Ukraine's military in unexpected ways, through not without risk. By law, Hungarians are prohibited to serve in foreign armies. But still, some have reportedly crossed into Ukraine to join in the fight. Others have supported in creative ways. For example, making trench candles, donating drones and winter gear to Ukrainian forces, and founding aid groups like the Carpathian Dragons and Yednist in the Transcarpathia region of Ukraine. Together, these volunteers organizations have raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for Ukraine's armed forces, with over half of donations coming from Hungarian citizens. So yes, Hungary's leadership remains a major obstacle to Ukraine's EU dreams at this moment, but still Orban's public statements and videos have held back key initiatives and fed into Kremlin narratives. But to paint the entire country with the same brush would be a big mistake, as you can see. From refugee aid to grassroots solidarity, many Hungarians are showing they stand with Ukraine even when their government does not. And here we have the interview with Kmak Smith, the former special advisor to Foreign Ministry of Ukraine and a true friend of our UETV editorial set. So hello, Mr. Smith. It is a really nice pleasure to see you here in our studio. And today I would like to ask you a little bit about what's happening in the near foreign states of Ukraine, for example, Hungary. Because a couple of days ago there have been a referendum held by the authorities on Ukraine's accession into the EU. You are from United Kingdom. Your country has joined the EU, then left the EU. Can you please tell us a little bit, are those fears of Hungarian politics about Ukraine destroying Hungarian economy true, or that is pure populism? What do you think about that?
Pavlo, first, it's always a privilege to join you on Ukrainian television English channel, so great to see you. Look, I think this is, look, we have to remember Viktor Orban is Putin's creature, right? I think that any fears that Ukraine would destroy Hungary's economy are not founded. The European Union has been probably the most successful economic union of states that has ever existed. And I know I'm Irish, and I grew up in the 60s and the 70s in what was a very poor country. Ireland joined the EU in the 1970s, and that has been not solely, Ireland has done a lot of very smart things, but membership of the European Union has contributed massively to Ireland's wealth, where now Ireland is one of the wealthiest countries on the earth per capita. So no, I don't think those fears I don't think those fears are founded. As I said, we need to remember that Viktor Orban is Putin's creature. Putin, like Donald Trump, hates the EU. And we have lots and lots of evidence going back a number of years, in fact, to the time of the Brexit referendum, you remembered, and we believe that there was a lot of dark Russian money involved in supporting the Leave campaign, because it is in Vladimir Putin's interest to see a weak and divided Europe. And while the EU is not all that Europe is, it is a very large part of Europe. The United Kingdom, which you said, for my own unfortunately left, and I think that has cost us very dearly. But you know, when it comes to security and supporting Ukraine, I think Ukraine has few better friends than the United Kingdom, and the United Kingdom, even now under a different government, continues to be at the forefront of Europe's security planning and supporting Ukraine.
Yeah, and we see that those countries that demonstrate the most humanness, yes, humanism, some kind of virtue, all human virtue,
like Canada, like Nordic states, like Estonia. It's no matter the party, the liberal, the conservative, some other party, they all, the opposition, the ruling ones, they declare that supporting Ukraine is one of their priorities, because they are not at war with Russia and Ukraine is. But on the other hand, we have some different, such drastically different approaches to the same very conflict with the change of American administration. And we know that Viktor Orban is also a good friend of Donald Trump. And should be we worried about Orban's influence in the European Union? Could he disrupt some joint actions? Or it is merely, I don't know, some political games he plays to get more support domestically?
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Unfortunately, Orban can disrupt and he can make European Union support of Ukraine very, very difficult. But there is a provision within the European Union Constitution called Article 7. And Article 7 allows the other countries to come along and suspend the voting rights of an existing member. It is, I've been discussing this for well over a year. It is long past time when the European Union applies Article 7 to Hungary and possibly to the Czech Republic also.
Okay, and you said...
Excuse me if I've got it wrong. It's the Czech Republic, not Slovakia.
Yeah, Czech Republic. Okay. And can you please tell us just a little bit of your experience? What happened after Ireland joined the European Union? What happened inside the country? What changed? Maybe what Ukraine can expect, not obviously the same, but maybe some similar chain of events that will happen inside the country, the judicial, economic systems, the changes. What are they?
I don't think there was, and I was a very young boy at the time in the early 70s, and I can't remember the changes. I can remember my parents at the time being very, very opposed to Ireland joining the European Union because they thought it was a big boys club. But what the European Union did was it gave fantastic subsidies to Irish farmers, which was a huge part of the Irish economy and other parts of the Irish economy. But it also, most importantly, it gave Ireland access to one of the biggest markets on earth, and that is the real power of the European Union, that we can trade freely among a market of almost 500 million people, and also, of course, that we can move freely and that we can go and live in these various countries. And this is something which will be hugely important. But I think for Ukraine, I don't think Ukrainians will notice any great change. The European Union, contrary to what people says, does not override our national laws. National laws are still made in national parliaments, and the laws of Ukraine will still be made in the Rada. So, Ukraine will still, and I hope it happens sooner rather than later, Ukraine joins the EU. This will not take anything from Ukraine's freedom and sovereignty, which is what people who oppose the European Union always say. What it will do is it will fundamentally do two things. It will give Ukraine access to that market of around 500 million people and some of the richest economies in the world. It will also give Ukraine far more security. And, we have to look beyond this war. And despite the rough times we're going through now, we have to assume that Ukraine is going to win. And after Ukraine wins, whatever that victory looks like, we might discuss that in a bit. We need to look at how we secure Ukraine's security going forward, because we know whatever deal Vladimir Putin signs, he negotiates in bad faith, and he always breaks his word. So the security guarantees for Ukraine going forward are very important. We know the Americans are trying to lock Ukraine out of joining NATO. They cannot do that forever. They cannot do it in perpetuity. They may well be able to do it for the lifetime of the current Trump regime, if indeed America stays in NATO. So there must be some sort of security alliance guarantee to give Ukraine security guarantees in the future, but also the economic benefits. But let me say one more thing. This is not all about what Ukraine gets from Europe. Ukraine is two things. Ukraine is potentially an economic giant. And I learned this back in 2016 when I first went out to work for your government. And I started saying, if Ukraine could only get the Russian boot off its neck, as I say, Ukraine is a sleeping giant. The economic potential of Ukraine is massive. But the other thing, and that will strengthen Europe economically as we trade and cooperate even more closely together. But the other thing is, I have said, and I dare anyone to contradict me, man for man, woman for woman, the strongest fighting force on the face of the earth today has got to be Ukraine. You have proven that with what you have done over the last nearly 3.5 years. We have already strengthened European security and up to recently NATO security by taking the great countries of Sweden and Finland, and we all know how you don't mess with Finland, into NATO. Can you imagine how much stronger NATO would be with Ukraine, with close to 1 million in their armed forces, and the battle hardened experience that your country has gained over the last 3.5 years, holding off overwhelming Russian odds? So, Ukraine in the EU and Ukraine in NATO is in all of our interests. And ultimately, what's at stake here is not just Ukraine, it's the free world, and it's our whole way of life, because we know that Putin will not stop in Ukraine. And we also now see the United States under the current regime, and I use the word regime very, very deliberately, taking a very, very worrying turn. So, it was Ukrainians in 2016 who actually first taught me the importance of Europe and the importance of the European ideal to be a bastion in the world for freedom and democracy. So this is all, so much rests with us in Europe at the moment, not just our governments, not just our armed forces, but actually 500 million Europeans need to learn to maybe make just a fraction of the sacrifices that Ukrainian citizens have made, pay more taxes, maybe accept lower public services because we have to spend more money on our army. And also maybe, as you Ukrainians do under martial law, accept some restrictions on our normal freedoms. Because, Europeans talk about, we don't have the fiscal headroom to spend more money on defense. Well, if we don't spend more money on defense and properly deter Russia and start by making sure that Ukraine is not defeated, we won't have any fiscal headroom to worry about in the first place. And this is the great challenge I feel at the moment, and something that I've been trying to develop for months now in various speeches and interviews, is it's not just about what we expect our government to do. 500 million Europeans need to move onto a war footing. My final point, it was the great Prussian military strategist, Klaus von Karl von Clausewitz in the 19th century, who said there's three things you need in place to win at war. You need your army, obviously, you need your government, but you also need your people, all in alignment. Ukraine has had that very, very much for the last over 3 years. That's where we need to start moving in Europe. Sorry if that was a long speech, but I think these are the important
Of
things we've now
course,
got to
that is very
think about.
important. And I believe that those points that you named are the ones that really scare somebody. They scare the Hungarian Prime Minister, which obviously serves some other outer interest, and that outer interest seems very aligned with the Russian geopolitical interest. We are hearing quite often that Russian interest must be taken into account everywhere, in the Caucasus, in the Middle Asia, in the Far East, and in Europe, in the Pacific. So everywhere Russian interest must be taken into account, and that means uncontrolled and unburdened influence spreading, economic and military one, while the actual territories of Russia suffer from lack of canalization, and other things. Their whole focus is on expanding and influence. And just because of that, some people who serve those interests in the European Union oppose Ukraine's joining. I'm not talking about NATO right now. I'm talking about the European Union, the economic one. Because, even with 35 or 33 million of people in Ukraine right now, I'm not counting the refugees that came to Europe, we are still a country with the size of Poland, with the size of the economy of Poland, possibilities of Poland, and the amount of natural resources that rare earths, metals, steel, gas, oil, everything, uranium is just enormous. So I believe you are right. Somebody is afraid of the sleeping giant of Ukraine waking up and getting on its feet. Who is that? Why does this have to happen right now? We can only guess. But still, that is a sin to consider, that if Russia leaves Ukraine, if, yes, you said the Russian boot leaves Ukraine and we are led to develop, that will be a really great investment in the joint European project. And maybe just because of that, the Russian project, the Russian new empire with Putin at its head, wants Ukraine to get to its territory, to have those wealth and resource and people for them, for their conquest and for their influence. Am I correct?
Yeah, you are very correct, Pavlo. And let me say a couple of things. And nobody in Ukraine needs to be reminded of this, but many of our European listeners or viewers may need to be reminded. We've all heard the lies as to why Russia had to invade Ukraine. It was to protect Russia's own security. It was because of NATO expansion. It was because Ukraine is full of Nazis. It was because Maidan was a US-backed coup. It was because there was a civil war in the Donbass, or there was genocide being carried out against the Russian-speaking minority, probably the most ridiculous Kremlin lie of all of them. Now, we know that they are lies formed by the Kremlin, and unfortunately, far too often in the West, we hear them amplified, sometimes by fairly influential people. But there are two reasons, and I've been saying this since January 2022. I've been trying to explain this in my interviews. There are two reasons, and two reasons only, that Russia invaded Ukraine. One, this is a 19th century war of imperial conquest. Putin made clear that in his mind, the biggest tragedy of the 20th century was the breakup of the Soviet Union. Remember, and you'll correct me, Pavlo, if I'm wrong, but Ukraine was one of 15 Soviet socialist republics, but it accounted for somewhere in the region of 40% of the wealth of the Soviet Union. Ukraine has the breadbasket. Ukraine has nearly all of the technicians and the rocket scientists. Ukraine has this as you just said, this massive wealth of minerals underneath her black soil. Russia wanted that back, but the thing that Russia feared more, and especially this is why this all kicked off after Maidan in 2014, what the Kremlin and the criminals in the Kremlin fear most is a free, democratic, and successful Ukraine on their doorstep, where the standard of living of the average Ukrainian is obviously so much higher than the standard of living of the obvious Russian, and the happiness and quality of life of the average Ukrainian is so much higher than that of the average Russian. That is the biggest threat to the wealth and the hold on power of the mobsters under Putin in the Kremlin, because that will send a very, very dangerous message to the Russian people. That is why Maidan was a step too far. And when Yanukovych was overthrown, what was the first thing we saw was the annexation of Crimea, and very shortly after that, the invasion of Donbass, which of course Russia denied. They tried to claim it was a civil war, but we knew at the time that there was anything between 6,000 and 7,000 regular Russian troops in command and control positions, and between 35 and 40,000 Russian paid mercenaries, and in the region of 500 battle tanks. The list would go on and on. It changed from day to day and week to week, but these were figures provided at the time, and you'll be aware of these by international observers like the OSCE and so forth. So, people have got to realize that and we thought we'd move beyond that. We thought we'd move beyond the point where might makes right, and the world is ruled by large countries who take what they want, and if you resist, you are responsible somehow for the war. Donald Trump has already accused Zelensky and Ukraine of starting this war. This is crazy. We know it's crazy, but he says it over and over again, and enough people will listen to him. So remember, 2 reasons that Russia invaded Ukraine. 1, greed. They wanted Ukraine's wealth. 2, they feared more than anything else a successful Ukraine would send a message to their own people, who would eventually rise up and overthrow their kleptocratic criminal mafia regime in the Kremlin.
Yes, I think that you are completely correct, and that is the quintessence of all maybe the scholarship and the philosophy, mental force that was trying to explain since 2014 why this war started. Mr. Smith, Kmak, I'm very happy that this interview happened. It was a real pleasure to have you in our studio. Thank you for that. You cannot even imagine how is it pleasant to hear such thoughts, such well-organized, such logical wordings from such a person like you. It is really a great pleasure. Thank you.
Pavlo, you're too kind, but it's always my great privilege to join you guys. And thank you very much.
Thank you again, and see you again.
So that's all for this wrap-up. Stay safe and tuned. Remember that some stories are formed here on the ground. They are made of human stories, and we are here to tell the truth about them. Remember to support our channel, leave a comment, like and share the video, because it is your support that we cherish the most. Stay safe and goodbye.